Good morning. My name is Sunny Summers. I'm a senior policy advisor with the Oregon Department of Agriculture. I am your host for this meeting. As a reminder, RAC members are invited to comment during this meeting. However, it is a public meeting, so anybody is welcome to listen in. So to start the meeting, I'm going to go through the list of invited RAC members so we know who is here, and then I will turn it over to the program to introduce a new staff member. So Greg Harris.
Here.
Thank you. Jeff Svedden. Okay. Ascension Ibarra. Okay. Eric Orem.
Good morning, Eric Orem.
Thank you. Carlos Bonilla.
Good morning, I'm here.
Good morning. Bob Walder. Okay. Tamara Mabbitt.
Good morning, I'm here.
Thank you. Tom Strawn.
I'm here.
Thank you. Karen Lewatsky.
I'm here. Hello.
Thank you. Justin Green. Jose Garcia. I see you in the list, Jose. To unmute, you're in the upper right-hand corner. Okay, maybe he stepped away. Cyan Holiday.
Hello, I'm here.
Okay. I see you came off mute, Jose. Not sure it's picking up the right mic because we still can't hear you. Okay. Maybe log out and log back in. Caleb Blay.
Morning, everyone. I am here.
Good morning. Paul Oyster.
Good morning, Sunny. I'm here.
Good morning. Brad Spencer.
I'm here. Good morning, everyone.
Morning. Danny Lytle.
Good morning. I'm in the car, so I'm going to be cameras off, but I'm here.
Awesome. Thanks, Danny. Mike Hyatt.
Good morning, all. I'm here.
Thank you. Terry and Nance.
Morning, everybody. I'm here.
Good morning. Okay, it looks like Justin Green just joined.
Good morning.
Chris Cowitz. Okay.
I don't
Isaac Staple.
think he's, I'm sorry, I don't think he's going to be able to join today. This is Tessa Wilburn from Oregon Water Resource Department.
Thank you, Tessa.
Mhm.
Are you filling in for him?
Oh, as best as I can, I guess.
Okay. Okay, Ascension just joined. Isaac Stapleton.
Yep, I'm here. Morning, sorry, it's late, folks.
Kevin Fenn.
Good morning, everybody.
Okay, Renee Mulan.
Good morning.
And Jose logged out. Hopefully he'll be back in a second. Okay, I think that's everybody on my list. So thank you all. I'm going to turn the mic over to Isaac and Renee and Kevin.
Thanks, Sunny. Yeah, morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us again. Before we jump in, did want to do a quick introduction of a new ODA staff member. We have a position that we hired for that will be a dedicated resource in the Lower Umatilla Basin, focusing on that work as well as the integrated water resources strategy work and some other stuff for the agencies. So Nick Sirivaka had joined us 3 weeks ago and is on. Nick, would you like to just pop on and introduce yourself to the group, just so they know who you are and that we've added another resource to this effort?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Good to see some familiar names on this call. Looking forward to working with you all on the effort and hopefully to continue the conversation and keep the ball rolling.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, we're super excited to have Nick on the team. So wealth of knowledge coming from his past experience with NRCS. Okay.
Isaac, real quick,
yeah.
let's do a mic check with Jose.
Okay, great.
Yeah, hi, Summer. I'm here.
Perfect. We can hear you.
Perfect.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. So I think the agenda, hopefully everybody had a chance to take a look at that before today and the revised draft that was posted as well. Want to walk through a few more of the rules sections, kind of as we've done in the past, but want to flag the agenda item D that we'll hopefully get to today, or at least like set the stage for around thinking about the fiscal impacts of the rules. That's a requirement for agencies when they're doing rulemaking to make sure that they get input on the fiscal impacts of whatever rule changes we're making. So we'll want to have a discussion about that specific component eventually so that we can include that in our public noticing documents. So just want to put a pin in that. Yeah, Karen.
Yeah, and for people who might not be as familiar with agency processes, the fiscal you're talking about is not the impact on growers or others that the rule will apply to, but is for the agency's fiscal impact, correct?
No, actually it is like, how will these rules impact growers, people who are
Wow,
subject
it
to
is
them?
so good that I asked that question.
Yeah,
because I
yeah,
was
thanks.
making the
Actually,
assumption
yeah.
the wrong way.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it gets confusing with fiscal impacts that we have to put on like bills for the legislative process. That's a different type of fiscal impact, and that is related to the agency's work. The fiscal impact for a rule is really like, how is it going to impact the people who will be subject to the rule?
It also includes any county, state agencies. So it's kind of all of the above.
Yeah. Cool. Well, with that, I think we'll hand it over to Renee to share screen and go through the rules like we've done in the past. And Sunny will be our facilitator as we move through. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Isaac. Good morning, everyone. I just want to thank everyone again who took the time to comment on the draft rules so far. The comments have been really helpful, and I appreciate them. And I especially appreciate the thought and the effort that this RAC is putting into these issues. So thank you again. The comments were really helpful with regard to the annual nitrogen budget contents. And I thought I would backtrack a little bit from where we were at the end of the last meeting, because we did make some edits to the proposed rules pursuant to the comments that we received. And so I just want to go through the changes that we made that address the comments we heard, so that you can take a look at them and start thinking about whether you think the rules are addressing the thoughts that you folks had. So I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. And be sure you speak up if you have a question, because I can't always see raised hands, or Sunny can let me know if somebody's got their hand raised. But first off, can everyone see the screen okay? Is it big enough to read well?
Yeah.
Speak up if it's not. Okay. So this is the concept of an annual nitrogen budget, which ODA is envisioning will be an assessment tool for growers to start really thinking about, how they're applying nitrogen to their fields, how much they're applying at what rate, and what are some of the situations that lead to, or what are some of the assessments that folks want to do when they decide whether or not to apply nitrogen. We did make some changes to this section, even though we went through it last session, because we did get a lot of comments that were all the same or of the same tenor, and we thought that they were good comments and we needed to address them with some changes in the proposed rules. So for example, in subsection 1, each year prior to the first application of fertilizers, a landowner subject to these rules shall prepare on a worksheet provided by the department an annual nitrogen budget that demonstrates that fertilizers will be applied only at the agronomic application rate necessary to support estimated crop yield. So this was a really good comment. And that is that ODA should be providing worksheets that folks can pull off the ODA website and fill out either as an Excel spreadsheet or some other format, so that the information is uniform, and it's a lot easier for folks who are using these rules to use them easily. So just wanted to point out that change in subsection 1. In subsection 2, we got a lot of comments about, oops, I'm sorry, it looks like Greg has a question.
Yep.
Yeah, depending on what the worksheet looks like, it may or may not make it easier if it's a spreadsheet. Depending on how many, if you got 1 or 2 fields, it might make it easier, or 8 fields, but if you got 80 fields or 100 fields, it may not make it easier. So is it, I'd like to see that worksheet before we do that, because it might be something we can duplicate in Excel or what have you, and be able to do it much easier. So
yeah, I don't know how many fields the worksheets would have on them, but I do know that the proposed rules lay out what the information that needs to be on the worksheet. So that can kind of give you some idea of the scope of the information that would be contained on the worksheet. And I guess maybe, Isaac and the group can talk more about, how and when we develop the worksheets. But I'm sure that this group's input would be helpful.
yeah, or
Another-
it could even be,
Go ahead.
or if it could even say on a worksheet, either provided by the department or one approved by the department, maybe, so we could, if there could be some flexibility there, so we could create our own, because we like our samples and stuff, we have certain formats that we download into, and we can put it in different formats, and it'd be helpful not to have to create a whole nother worksheet.
That's a good point. Karen?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing that Greg said in the second part of his comment, which is I don't know that it makes sense to require everybody to use the worksheet as long as all the issues raised by ODA's worksheet are covered, and lets Isaac and company, there's a really strong, personnel argument for that. It would be 200 times harder or something. And if that's true, then I think we should figure out how to address Greg's concerns without that. So.
No, I think it's a fair point to say that, if someone is keeping this information in a system already that keeps all of this, that's listed below the required elements, essentially, that could suffice. That is consistent with the pesticides program, for example, in their record keeping requirements. We say you got to have this. We offer sometimes, here's an example, here's a worksheet, but if you keep all this record in different ways, okay, that's what we'd want to be able to see. So I think that's a really good point to say. It could be on the worksheet provided by the agency, and I think it is important for us. You guys tell me if I'm wrong, but that we provide something for some people who may not have a worksheet or a system to make it easy. I want to make it simple for folks to be able to do it, but if you're already doing it, and have it another way. I get
Yeah,
that
I think
point.
it's the flexibility that's important. As Greg's saying, some of this has to do with scale, so for folks who have a smaller acreage or smaller number of fields and maybe don't have the expertise or folks to help them work on it, having a simple, and I don't mean simple like, having something
Yep.
that's easy to use
Yep.
would, I think, be a good idea to make this a little more equitable.
Okay, thanks.
then
Tamara had a question in the chat. Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
Would the department allow growers to be involved in the in the development of the worksheet to, get their ideas and their expertise? Certainly, it's the worksheet is going to be, it's not, set in rule what its format and style are. So like that's an internal process document that we would create, and it wouldn't necessarily have to be a formal RAC process to do that. So input and feedback is always welcome on how we can make our resources and materials better.
And then Danny has a comment.
Oh.
Not trying to derail, but I am going to jump slightly. I wasn't sure where to go ahead and ask this question, but we're under a large acreage section, so I'll do it here. As I was going through it, all of a sudden it became unclear to me when we were defining large acres. Are these growers who are producing 1,000 acres within the boundaries of the LUB, or 1,000 acres and 100 of that happens to fall within the LUB?
No, so I think, Renee, isn't that addressed at the top of the scope of these rules that is to the boundaries of the LUB? So it's 1,000 acres or more within the boundaries of the LUBGWMA. That's the place where these rules apply.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to make sure. That was my assumption, but then when I was reading the large acreage definition, that wasn't explicitly clear. So thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, and Renee can correct me if I'm wrong, but right. So if you're looking at how do these rules apply, it's this area, then that definition is only applying to that area that these rules are pertinent to. So
Yeah, I mean, so these rules only apply to lands within the LUBGWMA. So if you have 200 acres within the LUBGWMA, but 800 acres outside of the LUBGWMA, then you're probably not falling under these large irrigated acreages rules.
Yep.
All right, so are we done talking about the worksheet piece? Okay. Moving down to subsection 2, we got a lot of comments about this. This is the discussion about determining agronomic application rates. And so there was pretty much universal agreement that it's a good idea to test the soil before planting. But then there was a lot of discussion about how subsection B just wasn't quite working, especially for commodity crops. And just to clarify what subsection B says is that it says the landowner, or the language did say a landowner shall conduct soil sampling to determine plant available nitrogen and or conduct plant tissue sampling and analysis to determine nitrogen need prior to mid-growing season application and prior to late season application. So a lot of folks commented that this just doesn't work for commodity crops. It may work for crops such as potatoes and onions, where growers are kind of spoon feeding nitrogen to these crops throughout the growing season and testing the soil or doing petiole samples to figure out how much nitrogen to put down. But it doesn't work for other kinds of crops like wheat or corn or other commodity crops. And so we heard you. We think that makes sense, that is just too onerous and not necessary. So what we did was we put this language in here that qualifies when someone should be doing mid-season soil sampling or petiole sampling to determine a need prior to applying nitrogen. And that is where consistent with land grant university guidance for management of a specific crop. So basically, if this is like the general management regime for that crop, then go ahead and do soil sampling to determine soil or petiole sampling to determine how much nitrogen to put down mid or late season. So hopefully that addresses the concerns we heard about commodity crops, because our understanding is that with commodity crops, that's not the standard practice to soil or petiole test before you put down nitrogen. So what the intention is for this rule to work well for commodity crops and then to fit in with existing management regimes for other crops such as potatoes and onions. Any questions or comments? Did you guys want to think about it more, or should we move on?
Renee, I just want to make sure that I'm reading this right. So in B, where it's at, like the very last where it says and prior to late season application, that still all pertains to the beginning of that section where consistent with land grant universities, right? Like it's not saying that you have to do late season, right? Only if it, okay. I was sentence structure, construction. I just want to make sure that that was clear.
Yeah, so it's saying that if it's consistent with the crop management practices, basically, if you're going to put down nitrogen mid-growing season or in a late season application, you would want to do soil testing and or petiole testing, whatever works.
Greg?
What if, I don't know if this will come up, I can think of examples, but what if there is no good guidance from a land grant university? Say for instance, in Eastern Oregon, if the only guidance is Western Oregon or some other state, and we don't have a good guidance here, then can it be best available science or something along those lines, or a consultant if Pioneer Hybrid does, has done research for 40 years on corn. Could we use their management guide as opposed to a land grant?
That's a good question. I would defer to agronomists on the panel and.
I am an agronomist. That's
Thank you.
That's why I'm questioning it, because
okay, good. Thank you.
Oftentimes land grant university, sometimes there's not a data for us, and so it's
okay.
We use best available science, based on other research. So,
I mean, I
Greg,
think that's. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I was just going to ask Greg if he was just suggesting to change that sentence to land grant universities guidance or best available science for management, like if that was the edit.
yeah, and then that also gives us time. We can, as we come up with new crops or whatever, then we can put some of that fertilizer money to work and do some science and some research. But there's going to be times where we're going to run it where there isn't good guidance from a land grant university. So I think using best available science would be the way to move forward.
Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, could you just say best available science? I feel like that captures land grant universities and you don't have to, I feel like you're not limited in any means. Like grass seed, people grow grass seed. I don't think a land grant university's ever done research on grass seed. Or like if there's new crops that grow in and come in and stuff. I'm basically just echoing what Greg said and maybe just simplifying and eliminating the land grant university portion of it.
I think the folks at Oregon State and their turf program would disagree with your comment about grass seed, but understood. Yeah, Karen.
I just want to flag that a term like best available science has been known to blow up in our faces in this very region that we're talking about, the LUBGWMA. People have apparently different interpretations of what best available science means. And I am not in any way, shape, or form a person who can make that kind of judgment call. But if we're going to use an ambiguous phrase like that, we need to put some sideboards around it. And I don't know what they would be.
Well, and remember this B is a may. It's not like if that's available, if you have resources, it's trying to create flexibility for the grower to use resources to manage their crop and inform how they manage their crop. So we're trying to make sure that we build in flexibility, and some of that comes with ambiguity, which, makes it like not a clear, strict, hard rule, right? But I think your point is well taken with that term in this particular region. I don't know how else to say it though, because it will be different growers will use different resources. That's kind of what Greg's point was.
Well, it just might be a conversation with some of the other folks around the table to see how they feel about that.
Yeah.
I might be off base. Maybe it's not a flag to anybody but me.
Okay.
Yeah, Caleb.
I just want to jump in and sort of agree with Karen. The term best available science just kind of gives me the willies, that is really subjective. I wouldn't hate if we had some language in here around, land grant university if available, and if not, then maybe best available science, like make that the secondary. I don't know. It might bear more thought from all of us.
Okay. Thank you for that. Any more comments? Okay, moving on to subsection 3. B is an edit just clarifying that the documentation for adjusting an annual nitrogen budget shall be retained at the landowner's principal place of business for the agricultural operation and be made available upon request by the department. Subsection 4, there was some discussion in the last RAC about like the timing of creating and submitting a proof of certification of an annual nitrogen budget and how January wasn't going to work and that maybe May would be a better month. So we're not saying that May is the final answer, but I thought that I would go ahead and amend the rules to reflect the comments that we'd received that January is not going to work. And so if you guys want to continue thinking about the best deadline for submitting proof of certification of the annual nitrogen budget, that would be helpful. But I just put May in here as kind of a responsiveness metric to the comments and also as kind of a placeholder. So keep thinking about that and commenting on that if you could, please. The other edit is just reflecting that that if ODA is going to be enforcing, it would be pursuant to 468B025 subsection 1. So I just wanted to go over these changes because those were some good comments that we received. Thank you again. And I just wanted to let you know that we're thinking about them and trying to edit stuff to be responsive. So are we ready to move on to the annual nitrogen budget contents? Okay, here we go with responding to the comment about wanting worksheets, and I hear you about not making worksheets mandatory. So we'll continue to work through these rules and edit them as the policy discussion progresses. But what I'm hearing is that folks want a worksheet to be available, but don't necessarily want to have to use a particular worksheet. As far as the information that would be on, that would be necessary to be recorded, Subsection 1 talks about landowner name. Record the name of the landowner and the name of the operator if operator is not the owner of the land. And if a certifier prepares the form, then the name of the certifier shall also be included. Subsection 2 says crop year, record the crop year for the calendar year that the crop is harvested. Subsection 3, field identification and acreage, identification and acreage of each field. And then for each field, A, record the soil type or types. Record the pre-planting levels of plant available nitrogen, clarifying the chemical notation for what we're asking for in the root zone as determined by pre-planting soil sample results. And C, for the first annual nitrogen budget prepared after the effective date of these rules, record the residual soil nitrate levels for each field as provided in the residual soil sample rule. Now, just to refresh everybody's memory as to what these residual soil nitrate levels are, this is ODA trying to track the effectiveness of the large irrigated acreage program by creating a database of what the nitrate levels are in the deep soil horizon, so not in the first 24 inches, but in the deeper soil horizon. So it can track how much nitrate is in that soil horizon at the beginning of the program, and then then after that, be able to ask for residual soil nitrate levels on a periodic basis so that it can keep track of whether those nitrate levels are going up or down in the deep soil horizon. So it's a way for ODA to gauge the effectiveness of the management techniques that are happening at the upper soil layers. Subsection 5, growers are also supposed to record their nitrogen management measures. So for each field, record anticipated nitrogen management measures and specify the anticipated agronomic application rate. Subsection 5A, an agronomic application rate shall include total nitrogen applied from all sources, including irrigation water. Subsection 6, there's some edits that we got based on feedback from some agronomists, and that is emphasizing the importance of understanding your irrigation regime in concert with your application of nitrogen. So these are suggested changes. For each field, record the predominant irrigation method that will be used for crop irrigation during the growing season. And B, record the methodology that will be used to determine appropriate water application rates so that the amount of water applied from the combination of precipitation and irrigation does not exceed the soil's field capacity within the crop's rooting depth. 7, crop types. For each field, identify the crop types for the upcoming season. 8, estimated crop yield for each field. Estimate yield per acre for each crop type. 9, anticipated total nitrogen for each field. Record estimated total nitrogen to be applied from all sources. 10 seemed redundant, so I crossed it out. Let me know if you want me to keep it in. And then 11 asks for the adaptive management measures. We're going to be talking about those in a minute as applicable. And then certification. A landowner shall provide proof of certification of an annual nitrogen budget to the department by, again, May 1st is our current placeholder for that.
Aaron.
Yeah. So I've raised these issues outside of the LUBGWMA RAC call with individuals at ODA, but I'm going to circle back and say them again so they go on the record here, which is I really feel like the correct word we should be using instead of budget is plan, because this seems to me much more like a plan than an actual budget, which is kind of a term of art in agriculture. And I'm also wary of the term certification, which also has a very specific meaning and usage, which might be not exactly what we're saying here. And I'm not sure what another word might be for that. I've been trying to think about it, but both of those words flag for me as being terms of art within the agricultural community that maybe aren't being used the same way here as they would be when we talk about them in the kind of term of art way. And again, I would defer to Greg or other agricultural folks on the call if I'm mistaken.
So there's a rule that talks about what certification is. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at that.
Yeah, I'm aware of the rule. I'm just wondering, okay, I want these rules for me personally. I want these rules to be something that a layperson can read and feel comfortable and understand. And so that's why I'm bringing that comment forward. If we want to refer to definitions.
Okay. All right, thank you. Shall we move on to post-harvest summary records? Or do we still want to chat more about this stuff? I don't want to go too fast. Looks like we have a hand up.
Annie.
Yeah, hi Renee. I was wondering if I don't remember seeing it elsewhere in the rules, if there's guidance being provided by ODA on how frequently irrigation water should be tested for nitrates, or if you've put any thought into that particular component.
Haven't thought about that. It'd be good to hear if the group thinks that that is something that we should do. You don't have to do it right this second, but in comments. Does it fluctuate a lot over the course of the season, or?
I'm actually not sure offhand without looking it up, so I don't want to comment on that at the moment.
Okay.
It looks like Caleb may have a comment when you're done, Renee.
Go ahead, Caleb.
Thanks. Good flag, Danny. I know that just from the DEQ trends analysis, there was some language around nitrate levels peaking in the spring and changing seasonally. So I think it would probably be a good call for us to put up some sideboards around when and how often irrigation water should be tested. And for my own part, I would lean toward that being more frequent rather than less. Wouldn't want to make it too onerous, of course, but maybe something around as often as nitrogen is applied or something like that. I think this is something we should spend some time talking about, whether it's in this meeting or our next one.
Okay, Jeff.
So they're gonna have that the way the rules are written right now, they have to have that nitrate number before May. So I mean, I don't know, you're limiting how you can, when and where you can sample as it is, right? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't want to add a bunch of extra sampling on top of what is already being asked personally. And again, I think it's good to report what your water was at some point. I don't know. We pull straight from the Columbia, so we don't really worry about it because it's 0 for us. But I understand that wells that can fluctuate a little bit more. But I don't know. It seems like that might be a costly exercise, is kind of my reaction to it.
Yeah, and I'll just mention quickly that really this is supposed to be an assessment tool for the grower. So if a grower wants a really accurate annual nitrogen plan budget, or trying to forecast it, then they're going to know. They should have an idea, or maybe we need to write into the rules that they look at how much nitrogen is in their water, but it's got to go into their assessment of how much nitrogen they put down. And again, it's a forecast. So they're trying to think about, okay, what are all my sources of nitrogen going to be? Well, I know I'm going to have a whole bunch coming in from my irrigation water because I'm pumping it out of, wherever. So I might want to test that, 3 times because I know it fluctuates a lot, or I'm going to want to test it once, or I don't know. But just trying to be mindful that this is supposed to be a tool that the growers use. And hopefully we're trying to stay away from being too prescriptive, but we want to catch everything that's important. So I'm not saying anyone's wrong here in these comments. I'm just telling you what we're trying to do. And so we're just trying to have the grower have enough flexibility in their own particular site management that it's not over onerous, but they are kind of looking at all of their sources and thinking about it. I hope that helps.
Yeah, and we specifically called it out because we want to acknowledge that that is a source with some of the water there, and so that should be taken into account when looking at nitrogen needs for a crop.
Yeah, I think I agree. Sorry, I agree that it should be reported and it should be sampled. I was referring mostly to the sampling multiple times throughout the year. That seems, I think, in a fair amount of situations, somewhat excessive. But I'm biased towards, I think, our situation, because I'm like, how many times do you want me to sample 0? Right? So I'll also just comment on Karen. I agree that it's more of a plan than a budget. I liked that verbiage more so than budget personally. So yeah.
Thanks, Jeff. Greg?
Just a couple things echo what Karen said. I also like the idea of plan. And based on what Jeff said is, it doesn't make sense if we're pumping out of the Columbia River or a well that's 800 feet that has been 0 its whole life, it doesn't make sense to do a nitrogen sample every time you run in the irrigation lab. So I think maybe if you're pumping out of a well where there's no nitrogen content or something, that you can put some sideboards around that maybe, but certainly the Columbia River is not going to fluctuate. It's going to be 0. So it wouldn't make sense to sample it multiple times throughout the year. Or the Umatilla River or various, deep water sources that we pump out of that have 0 nitrogen in them. It's that's just a added expense at any level. So but there are some wells, to everybody's point, there are some wells that do have nitrogen in them, so those should be tested. But I think a lot of the sources once a year, or even if it's we know the Columbia does not have nitrate in it, so why test it over and over?
Thanks, Greg. Danny?
Not endorsing this or unendorsing this, but just as people are thinking about this particular topic and maybe emailing in, California, for their groundwater irrigation water testing, they've required every 2 years in their nutrient budget plans. So just for some wider, broader context, that's the number that they settled on.
Thank you. And just as a reminder to folks, if you're not an invited RAC member, you can email us any comments at rulemaking@oda.oregon.gov. Caleb?
Yeah, good flags, Greg and Jeff. Definitely don't want people to be testing 0 just over and over and over again. And I hope it didn't come across as me suggesting that folks should have to, test their irrigation water every time they irrigate. I do like the idea of maybe an annual for, known low risk surface waters or deep basalt wells, and then maybe something more frequent for alluvial wells. Yeah, I would really like to see something for wells that are subject to change throughout the year. At least multiple samples throughout the year seems like a good idea moving forward. Just wanted to put that on the record.
Thanks, Caleb. And Jose also commented in the chat that the landowner can always strive to do what's best is always a good practice. So thank you, Jose.
Great. Good discussion, everyone. Should we move on, or is there more that we want to chat about in this particular content of the budget plan, whatever? Okay. So moving on to post-harvest summary records. The summary records are intended to be kind of a report card for the grower after they've already done their planning for their annual nitrogen budget. This is a way for the grower to come back and assess, all right, well, how well did I do at forecasting how much I needed to put on? How well did I figure out what my agronomic application rate was? So this is the beginning of the next couple of rules address assessment of your annual nitrogen budget and evaluation of how well you did. So that's just kind of framing it up in the larger context before we dive into the text. So subsection 1, each year following implementation of an annual nitrogen budget, a landowner subject to these rules shall prepare a post-harvest summary record, again, talking about the worksheet, and we understand the comments that we've received. The post-harvest summary record is to be used to evaluate the effectiveness of an annual nitrogen budget. So this is an assessment tool for the grower. A post-harvest summary record shall be retained for 5 years at the landowner's principal place of business for the agricultural operation and made available to the department for inspection upon request by the department. So this is not something that is certified, and there's no proof of certification that is submitted to the department. This is just developed and used by the grower. Subsection 3, a post-harvest summary record shall include each of the following elements. A, landowner's name, record the name of the landowner and the name of the operator if the operator is not the owner of the land, clarifying that it's not going to be certified. Subsection B, crop year, harvested, record the crop year for the calendar year that the crop is harvested. C, crop type, for each field, record the type of crop harvested. D, crop harvest yield, record the crop harvest yield and crop production units per acre, and include all harvested material from primary harvest, secondary crop harvest, and crop residues, pounds per acre. E, irrigation water management measures, and this is subject to a comment that we received. For each field, a landowner shall record the soil moisture level ascertained as necessitating each instance of irrigation. F, nitrogen management measures, record nitrogen management measures implemented, including the agronomic application rate used for each crop. G, total nitrogen applied, pounds per acre. For each field, record the total nitrogen applied as follows. Total nitrogen applied through irrigation water and total nitrogen applied through fertilizers. H, for each field, a determination according to this next rule of whether the annual nitrogen budget was followed and a description of the methodology used to make this conclusion. For each field, describe any applicable adaptive management measures to be employed in the following year's annual nitrogen budget. So to go back to the basic structure of these rules, the annual nitrogen budget is an assessment tool. The post-harvest summary record is an assessment of how well you followed your budget or not, and if you didn't, why. And then this next rule is talking about how to evaluate whether you followed your annual nitrogen budget. And then the final piece is the adaptive management measures. So if you didn't follow your annual nitrogen budget, this is what I'm going to do next year to see if I can, do a better job of forecasting and following my budget. I see a hand up.
Yep, Greg.
Yeah. So just clarification on E, irrigation water management measures for each field landowner shall record the soil moisture level ascertained as necessitating each instance of irrigation. So is that suggesting that every time the center pivot goes around, if it's on a 24-hour revolution, that we have to record what the soil moisture content is before it runs around? I mean, that's a different instance than when you flood irrigate once or twice a week, or people run their wheel lines. I mean, center pivot irrigation it's a much different practice than where that may fall into place.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. It's like, what's an instance of irrigation? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, this says each instance of irrigation. So
yeah. So what is an instance?
It's running. Yeah, because we can have a pivot running 24 hours a day because we're designed to kind of match ETs. So it's
sure. I mean, can you think of do you want to suggest language that might be better to capture that? Because this was just draft language trying to capture the concept that, and I'm not really sure how to put it. Like, what was the soil moisture level when the grower decided they needed to irrigate? I don't know if that fits the management regimes for irrigation out there or not. So I think a lot of, comments on this point would be really helpful. I think that the policy point that the rule is trying to get at is that, the other piece of this equation of nitrogen application is making sure that you're not like over irrigating and, facilitating the leaching of nitrates past the crop root zone.
sure.
So
I agree. And the concept is, I totally agree with the concept 100%. It's just the language of each instance is different. So I can think about it. We can provide some language on it, but I 100% agree with the concept though. So it's more just the way it's written. So
sure. No, that would be awesome if you guys can help out with the drafting language. I would just love that. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Jeff?
Remind me, I don't know these rules, the inside and out near as well as Isaac and Renee, but aren't we reporting soil moisture for every fertilizer application? Would that meet what this is trying to achieve in E? If people, I guess that's based on the assumption that people are doing in-season nitrogen applications, which might not hold across, but that was one of my thoughts was, are we already capturing that through in-season fertilizer applications? I'm with Greg. I agree with the concept.
Sure.
I'm personally I'm not qualified to help with the writing. Sorry.
Oh, rats.
Oh, come on. Don't sell yourself short.
So I'm kind of scrolling back up to the annual nitrogen budget contents, like what you're supposed to forecast. And so you're supposed to record like the predominant irrigation method that you're going to be used and the method that you're going to use to determine the appropriate water application rates. So, are you going to look at, if you go back to the irrigation rules, you'll see there's like a whole list of ways that you can figure out, soil moisture content before you irrigate. So you just want to like talk about like, this is the predominant irrigation method I'm going to use, and then this is how I'm going to figure out what my soil moisture is. And so that's what you need in your budget. Excuse me. And then after the fact, I guess kind of the report card piece of it is like, okay, well, what was your soil moisture when you irrigated, so that you can go look back and see that you did that soil moisture determination and what it was, and then that's when you irrigated, kind of thing. So I don't think it's redundant, but I could be wrong. If you want to go back or we could all go back and look at the rules. and see if
Carlos?
it is redundant.
Yeah, I think this is a pretty good discussion, actually, because, and I wonder if we we expect the growers demonstrating that every time that they are irrigating, they have a specific soil water content, or we will rely on the plan that each one is presenting at the beginning of the year or a summary at the end of the year. Those are two different approaches. I think all of us agree about the purpose, and it's great to hear the thing that we don't want to go beyond field capacity. But as Greg said, different to the when you apply fertilizer, that can be 1, 2, 3 times a year. This can happen every week. So that means that every week someone has to have a record, and at the same time, there's two approaches to compute that value. One is you can compute ET based on the atmosphere, the climate condition, so you are actually not measuring the soil water content. But the model is so good that it's a good estimate, a nice proxy to that one. And the other one is actually measuring the soil water content, and we are not requiring to have a kind of sensors in every one of the sites. So I wonder if we want to clarify that thing, that maybe we are not asking to record every time that you are irrigating the soil water content, or it will be fine if we only have the plan at the beginning of the season. It is just a question. I don't have the solution. I'm just providing some insights on the question that came up.
So just make sure I'm understanding, and I might not be. So are you saying maybe we should just delete E?
No.
No,
I think the principle is fine, and I think
Oh.
Greg pointed pretty well, but can be read in a different way too. That every time that I'm irrigating, I have to record how much soil water, how much water I had at the beginning of the irrigation event. That means a lot of information. It is, as a scientist, I really like it. It would be interesting and later correlated to the yields and all that stuff. But I don't know if we are planning to use that information later, because technically the growers are using that thing because they have a model that computed.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a policy, like regulatory perspective, right? Like, we definitely want to make sure that folks are looking at that before they make an application, whichever method that they're using, so that they know that they're not oversaturating that profile.
Right.
I do understand that that's a lot of data. To Greg's point, like that's every single day, for a field that's running 20, like just to keep up with ET in summer. So what does that look like? And yeah, I mean, I think we're open to suggestions around that, but the goal is to ensure in these rules that it's clear that growers need to be doing that assessment if it's daily, they're irrigating on a daily basis, to ensure that they're not creating that leaching issue. So.
Hi, this is Larry Lucher. Could I make a comment, please?
I'm sorry, Larry, are you representing a RAC member?
Yeah, I'm a new member. I'm joining at a late stage of the game.
No, I'm sorry. Only invited RAC members are welcome to participate. So we have specifically invited folks. So unless you're replacing an invited RAC member, you're welcome to put your comments in the chat or send us an email.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to the comments because they've been really helpful in lending a pragmatic perspective on how to make this work. So thank you in advance. Should we move on to annual nitrogen budget evaluation? This is going to be a big challenge, so I think it would be good if we get started since we don't have that much time left. Okay, so this is admittedly the trickiest piece. I'm just qualifying my comments here. This has been the trickiest piece of this rulemaking, is how do we evaluate or how does a grower evaluate an annual nitrogen budget to determine that they're actually applying as much nitrogen as is needed to reach their estimated crop yield, but they're not leaching nitrogen into the groundwater. In a perfect world, we would have these wonderful data points that would help us figure out, like, if you've got X amount of nitrate in your soil at the end of the post-harvest, you're going to have a problem with leaching over the fall and winter, unless you do something about it. In a perfect world, we would have quantitative numbers that we could use to gauge when somebody might be getting into trouble and actually leaching or beginning to leach or have the possibility of leaching nitrate into these deeper soil horizons and possibly into groundwater. But we don't have that. And so what we're trying to do is figure out how does a grower know that they're reaching that magic equilibrium where they're putting on enough to meet their estimated crop yield, but they're not leaching nitrate into the deeper soil horizons. So this isn't perfect, and we're still kind of muddling through this, and your comments again will be helpful, but here's what we've come up with so far. And so I'll just go through it with you to make sure everyone understands the text. 1, a landowner is following an annual nitrogen budget if each application is made at an agronomic application rate, and that's the concept that you're only applying what you need and not leaching into the deeper soil horizons. And for each field, plant available nitrogen from all sources does not exceed the total nitrogen required to reach each crop's estimated yield. So this is what we're going for. This is what you want in your annual nitrogen budget, is you want to reach that nice balance where you're applying at an agronomic application rate, not leaching, and you're reaching your estimated crop yield. A landowner may determine whether they followed their annual nitrogen budget by using any of the methods described in subsections 2 through 4 of this section. So again, we don't have this nice quantitative data that we wish we had that could give you an easy answer as to how well you're doing, because we don't know, how much is a good nitrate soil, what's a good nitrate percentage versus a bad one as far as quantitative numbers. So the first method is a landowner may compare the sum of all nitrogen inputs with the sum of all nitrogen outputs to determine environmental loss. Environmental loss indicates that a landowner has not met or followed their annual nitrogen budget. Environmental loss may be determined as follows. Total nitrogen input is calculated as the sum of all nitrogen inputs from applied fertilizer, irrigation water, and estimated mineralization and atmospheric deposition. Total nitrogen output is calculated as the sum total nitrogen removed from crop yield removal and from crop biomass harvested multiplied by tissue nitrogen concentration. Environmental loss may occur through leaching, denitrification, volatilization, or leaching. Oops, that's redundant. Environmental nitrogen loss may be estimated as follows. So environmental loss equals the sum of inputs minus the sum of removal. Now, I know that this is ridiculously simplistic. We had, so I granted that's an acknowledgement. But the idea is to try to figure out how much nitrogen you've put on, how much you've taken off, and if there's been substantial environmental loss, that may indicate that you're leaching nitrate into the deeper soil horizon. All right, let's hear the comments. I see hands.
Let's start with Jeff.
I just want to start with, I think this is probably acknowledging this is probably the hardest section for you to write. I'm concerned that anything that's not used is automatically labeled as environmental loss. Because if you like, I mean, there's going to be some nitrogen in the soil. If you went out and sampled sagebrush right now, there's nitrogen in that soil. But that's not environmental loss, right? So there's going to be nitrogen in your soil no matter what. And so and there's some crops that are more efficient than others at taking up nitrogen. So I mean, it's very common in your crop rotation to scavenge nitrogen following inefficient crops, right? So I mean, if you look at, you're like, oh, we have more nitrogen at the end of the year. So let's grow wheat, and then we can capture that nitrogen that, if we didn't do anything, there's the potential for it to be moved to places that like leaching into the aquifer that we don't like. But just because there's nitrogen there being automatically labeled environmental loss, I find that concerning. And I find that concerning considering the precedent that I think these rules are going to set across the state as well. So, yeah, that's the one thing that I was concerned about is anything that's not taken off is automatically an environmental loss. That just carries a lot of weight, I think, behind those two words.
Okay, thank you.
Greg?
I think and I appreciate what you're trying to do here with the simplicity, but there's, many of the crops we grow, you don't take 100% biomass off. It's not possible. Even corn silage, you leave some of the biomass back behind the crop. And so if you, for instance, potatoes where you're leaving all the vine, if you just take, the nitrogen content of the potato, and then you take a soil sample, the budget is going to say that you lost a bunch of nitrogen, even though it's sitting there in the vine. That we're going to work in. We're going to plant a crop. We know we're going to take up that nitrogen with our cover crop or the following crop, and so it's not so simple just to say it's X and this, or even if you're harvesting grain corn, there's going to be and you don't harvest off the biomass. If you work it back in, there's going to be some nitrogen in that biomass that you're working back in. So it's it's not that simple, and I could see where, especially on a crop where you're not removing all the biomass, where I could remove the potatoes, take the potatoes off, take a soil sample, and they say, and it comes back and says you've lost 150 pounds of nitrogen when in fact it's sitting in the potato vine.
Would it be
So how do
better?
we?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah,
I was
so
wondering.
But that comes back to the whole idea of the annual budget and budgeting an annual budget on a field or fields, over a period of years that has multiple crops. Because we'll do more than one crop per year on most of our fields, even if it's a cover crop. So it's said I appreciate the simplicity, but unfortunately it's more complicated than that.
Oh, yeah, no, I know it is. It was interesting because originally I thought it would be a good idea to follow the methodology in the San Joaquin Valley where they do an applied and removed ratio. And so for the removal, to your point, which I think is a good one, they include, of course, crop residue. And so you have to figure out how much you put on, and then you have to figure out exactly how much you've taken off, which would be the crop and the residue, etc. And you have to know what's the nitrogen coefficient for each of those things so that you can effectively calculate how much nitrogen you've taken off. So in California, I think UC Davis and some other folks have done a lot of research on okay, what's the nitrogen coefficient for certain crops that are grown in the value? What's the nitrogen coefficient for residue and certain, things that are harvested along or not harvested with the crop, so you can figure out more accurately what's your applied and your removed ratio. But again, we're kind of hamstrung here because we don't have that history of developing a technical bench to support the rules yet. So we're kind of, again, like I wish we had quantifiable soil nitrate data that we could use to compare whether or not you're doing well or not. We don't have that, nor do we have like a lot of technical support about like what the nitrogen coefficients are for the crops and for the, you know, whatever you're harvesting or not off the land. So a little bit, you know, trying to figure out what we can do with the information that we don't have.
Okay, Jeff?
I mean, I'm just gonna throw out ideas because you guys seem to be pretty open to them, right? And I'm kind of trying. I agree with everything that Greg's saying. Um, I wonder if I feel like you're doing all the math for the grower. Could you just require them to report end of season soil nitrate, end of season, nitrogen in removal, like in the product that they're removing? So like, they're gonna have yield because they have to report yield. They're gonna have the soil samples, they have to report that. And then if you require like a percent nitrogen in the grain content or whatever it is, I feel like if you want it to be a referencing tool, if they know how much they have at the end and they know how much they put on at the beginning, I just feel like you're walking them through the process more than they need to. Like they're almost being led through the nose on it. And I think like I said, I think that just I feel like you're doing the math and probably just trying to do a good job, right? But farmers should be able to look at how much they have in their soil. They should be able to look at this is how much nitrogen it was in my harvested material. And then if guys aren't doing this, then they're going to be able to they're going to learn over time, right? Because they've never had to do this. But quantifying and saying if there's any differences between those as environmental loss is concerning. So maybe just reframe it and just say you will report at the end of the year these things around nitrogen. And people might have other comments about that, but that's my thoughts out loud on the spot.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jeff, I think I appreciate your comments. I think we were trying to make, to your point, like lead people through the nose a little bit. Like to your point, like not everybody may know the best way to do that, and they're gonna have to learn over time. Our intent with giving some options here was like, hey, this is how you can go about this. Here's ways that you should be looking at this to see how well you did, and then making some adjustments for how you're going to manage whatever's coming after that crop in rotation or whatever. So we're like, that's kind of what the goal was, but I hear you. Like, it's certainly not perfect. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think my question is, does that need to be in the rules or does that need to be something where they're working with the other extensions of OSU and ODA to find, to evaluate that? I mean, is the rule process, this is how you evaluate, or is the rule process saying this is what you have to report? And then you learn from what you're reporting, right? So, I mean, I think that fundamentally comes back to what you guys want to achieve with this is if you're going to require them to report information, or you're also in your rulemaking, this is how you interpret it. I think that's more a fit for the extension industry and all the other arms of government that farmers have, or, crop consultants that they have available to them. So that's kind of my thinking on it. Because I think with you guys trying to provide interpretation of the data, I think that's convoluting the rules a little bit. And again, like I said, I get worried about precedent for other ways this might be used. So I think that's my response to what you're saying, Isaac. I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and I definitely hear your comment about the term environmental loss. So
Okay,
Greg?
Greg?
Yeah, I think, in the end, the soil samples are going to speak for themselves. It's, I mean, that's really what it comes down to, right? Is what's left in the soil and how it's used, whether the following crop or what have you. But to just say environmental loss is equal to inputs minus removal, it's, and you know, like Ray's comments, you have root systems that are left you have plant parts that are left that even on an annual crop, you know, you have root growth, various things that are taking up nitrogen, using nitrogen. So to just say that is environmental loss is concerning because it's not, and I think ultimately to Jeff's point that the post-harvest soil samples really are going to show us, you know, what we need to know, because the only way you're gonna get the nitrogen for total biomass is you have to remove all the root systems, everything to actually calculate that, and that's not feasible.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Do we move on to the next method? So 3, a landowner may determine whether they have met or followed their annual nitrogen budget by determining soil nitrate levels in post-harvest soil samples. Low post-harvest soil nitrate concentrations limit the loss of soil nitrate below the root zone during the winter and indicate that a landowner has applied fertilizers at an agronomic rate. B, increasing or high post-harvest soil nitrate concentrations may indicate that a landowner has not applied fertilizers at an agronomic rate. Again, this is in lieu of hard numbers, which I wish we had. Maybe you guys have them. Any comments? Questions? Okay, so that's the other method. Oh, hand up.
I'll just echo. I feel like I don't know if the rules should be interpreting the numbers for the landowners. Kind of just echoing my comment before. I think these two sections fall under that as well. And then what low and what high is extremely ambiguous. And yeah, I mean, you can apply. The thing is you what your yield you budget for. If you plan and you apply for that in July, and then let's say, you know, there's a disease that comes in and damages your yield significantly. It's like, well, did I apply at an agronomic rate? Yeah, but I didn't know that I was going to have a white mold infestation that reduced my crop, right? So
yeah.
I just interpreting low and high based and means you met or did or didn't use an agronomic rate, right? Is kind of hard. Again, I think that goes to, I like the term plan better than budget, because it is what you're really doing is a plan.
Okay. 4, a landowner may determine whether they have met or followed their annual nitrogen budget by determining whether they met or exceeded their estimated crop yield. A, if a landowner has met or exceeded their estimated crop yield, this is an indication that a landowner has met or followed their annual nitrogen budget, but only if an agronomic application rate was used for each application. B, if a landowner has met or exceeded their estimated crop yield, this may be an indication that excess plant available nitrogen remains in the soil at the 12 to 24-inch depth. And to the comment about like, well, if you have crop failure, then I mean, then you record that like this is why I didn't meet my budget plan, whatever, because you know there was a drought or I had a crop failure for one reason or another. Again, this is an assessment tool for the grower. So any thoughts on this method? Did I like strike out completely 3 for 3? Okay. Or you can comment in writing as well. But the point is that somehow the grower needs to assess how they did. Then you're also going to want to figure out what your adaptive management measures are. For each field where an annual nitrogen budget was not met or followed, a landowner shall record in the following year's annual nitrogen budget the adaptive management measures they will employ according to Table 1. And so what this table does, and I don't know if we want to go into this today, given our time or not, maybe we can do a check-in, Sunny. But this table talks about, you know, if you've met or followed your budget, these would be your required actions. Nothing, you're doing well. If you didn't after year 1 or after year 3 or after year 5, these are the things that you need to look at as incorporating, you know, management measures that you want to incorporate into your next year's plan. So do we want to dive into this today?
I think your explanation is good, but we should hold that over until our next meeting in July.
Okay.
Just if
Yeah.
anybody has clarifying questions on how to read it and follow it. And then we can dive deeper with any comments at our next meeting, which is scheduled for July 24th at 10:30 in the morning.
Okay. So lots of good discussion. Do appreciate it. Please do submit comments like you have been. If you get them to me like the week of the meeting, I won't always get your changes into the rules, but I'll try. But just don't be thinking I'm blowing you off if you don't see the changes or the response in the rules. So I hope this was a helpful discussion, and I hope you keep the comments coming. Are there any things that we want to chat about before we sign off?
Caleb?
Just want to jump in and thank you all for the really hard work you keep putting into this, Renee, especially you. I know this is very, very far from easy writing. I think we're on the right track. I would really like to see another crack at that section 2. I think we could get there with that, but generally I agree with Greg and Jeff. That's not really a measurement of environmental loss. That's more a measurement of the nitrogen that wasn't removed. And those, yeah, there could be environmental loss within that, but distinguishing the two is where we need to nail down. And I'll do some thinking and try to get something to you in writing.
That would
But
be
thank you
great.
again, everybody. Great meeting, great conversation.
Thank you. I would say just another reminder about thinking about the fiscal impact piece to anybody and everybody involved. The more information you provide us, the better we can write that section. Danny?
I just wanted to reiterate what Caleb said. Renee and Isaac, I really appreciate the ongoing conversation that we've been able to have over these topics. I appreciate that.
Thanks, Danny.
Yeah.
As the person who's going to be filing the paperwork for Isaac, I would also ask that if anybody has any comments about how this might impact racial equity in the state, that is a question that the Secretary of State asks us, and I frequently feel like we don't always have great answers for. So if you could think about any impacts that this might have along those lines, we would welcome that information as well. Isaac, any closing?
No, I think that's great. Thanks everybody for the engagement today. Really helpful, particularly for some of these very tricky situations where we're trying to get at a concept, but we're not quite sure how to frame that up so that it's reflective of what you all are doing and actually makes sense for what we're trying to achieve with the rules. So I really appreciate you guys continuing to engage. And yeah, the sooner you get us the comments, the better. And that way we can get a different draft out ahead of the next meeting too, so we can keep that kind of updating. So appreciate all your time.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Isaac and Renee.
Bye, thank you.